Anne-Genter, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on the second reading of the Land Transport Amendment Bill, which we're very happy to support, although we do note that it has taken quite a long time for the government to finally realise that this is an issue that does need to be dealt with. And as has been noted by previous speakers, it's unclear why this has taken over 4 years to come before the House, when so many lives could have been saved if it had been implemented earlier. There's no question that simply changing the law isn't enough to reduce the harm of drink driving. The single most effective thing we could do to reduce the risk of harm from drink driving is to actually reduce the need for people to have to drive to and from their sources of entertainment. And it's quite an anomaly because in New Zealand, as in some other countries, we have the very intriguing situation where we require pubs in most towns and cities in New Zealand to provide large off-street car parks, while at the same time hoping that people will not be driving to and from the pub. In fact, I'm aware of one bar in Christchurch which was required to provide a huge number of off-street car parks simply to comply with district planning rules. Of course, you wouldn't be hoping that most people would be driving to and from the pub. And the off-street car parks, which they had to provide a building for, were actually 1/3 of their overhead. So it's an example of where there's some significant opportunities for New Zealand from moving from regulations and transport planning that assumes that every single trip will be made by car to one that actually gives people better choices. And having better public transport services in our towns and cities, and having pubs within walking distance of where people live and work, is actually an opportunity to reduce the risk of motor vehicle accidents, as well as reducing the cost of the infrastructure. So we're happy to see that finally, Mr. Speaker, the national government finally listened to the evidence and the research and take action on something that will save a significant number of lives on the road. And we do believe that they could have an even more ambitious target for reducing road deaths and road injuries. There are many other jurisdictions, comparable jurisdictions, that have a vision of a zero road toll. And I think it's about time that New Zealand start to adopt that. Because when we aim for a zero road toll and zero harm from our transportation system, that's when we'll start implementing the sorts of policy that will actually get us there. At the moment, the national government's pursuing a very status quo approach to transport planning and funding, which will not do much to reduce the cost of transport, and it certainly will not reduce to any significant extent the injuries and deaths that happen on the road, because ultimately we're still building everything around the idea that everyone has to drive everywhere, whether that's to the pub or not. So as I said, the Green Party, I didn't follow this through the Select Committee. It was my colleague Kevin Haig. And he did mention that there were some aspects of the bill that he was disappointed that the Select Committee did not take up. And I think we still probably have some concerns with the new procedures for dealing with blood specimens, and whether or not there's any infringement on the rights of a defendant or someone who's been prosecuted to have access to the sorts of, it's about how the evidence is presented in court and what evidence is available. And obviously, there are times when there has been a loophole in the Act regarding drivers who cannot give blood samples, allowing the prosecution of a driver for refusing to permit a blood specimen to be taken. And we still have some concerns about the way that was introduced and dealt with. But ultimately, we do like to see the small step on the road to progress in reducing the harm from alcohol-related motor vehicle accidents, but also we'd like to see an even more ambitious target for road safety and the reduction of harm. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Simon O'Connor.
Very pleased to take what is the final call on this Land Transport Amendment Bill.